So today I'm really glad to share with you my recent research on consumer health vocabulary. This is actually the new life research I started since I joined FSU last year. If you were in my high school research retreat talk last year, you know that I was doing a lot of work in clinical trial research, generalizability stuff. So this is actually a totally new thing. So I'm really glad that I can get a collaboration from Sang-hee, share some results and share some data with me. That's really great. So today I'm going to talk about how do we leverage social media to enrich consumer health vocabulary. So briefly, I'll give you an overview. I'll first talk about the background, our motivation of this work, and then I'll talk about some recent work on enriching health consumer vocabulary, and then I'll basically break it down to 3 recent research projects that I'm doing. One is to assess the terminology coverage of the tags in diabetes-related blogs. And the second one is to assess the related blogs, not only look at the tags, but also look at the full textual content of the blogs and social question answers. And lastly, I'll talk about a recent work on leveraging social media, especially on social question answers data, to enrich health consumer vocabulary, consumer health vocabulary. So first of all, why is it important? I actually just read a news article this morning about how electronic health record. They're saying, basically electronic health record is failing its promise to the public because one recent article published in JAMA, in Journal of American Medical Informatics Association, reported that nearly half of the face-to-face contact between the patients to the healthcare providers information are lost in electronic health records, which is actually huge because, as you can imagine, since 10 years ago, when America several years ago when America started to adopt the electronic health records, the government has spent over $30 billion in this, and also if you consider various costs associated with adoption of EHR in the different hospitals and entities, they have been over $3 trillion invested. So if this is a failure, how can we kind of get back our money, right? So the government is actually very concerned about it. So it's not only about how electronic health record can record your health information. It's actually more about how we as a patient should be participating in our healthcare services and be able to interact with our patients or providers in our own health. So with the help of internet technology, we have a large amount of health information data online available to the general public. For example, Medline Plus, which is a well-curated health information provided and maintained by National Life Medicine, is a very nice information source, very nice portal for any patients to be able to search for conditions, disease, and treatment plan for individual person. And they try to use a consumer language to describe some symptoms and the syndromes which can serve the purpose of bridging the gap between consumers and the professionals. But still, we're not there yet because, as I will show you in the next few slides, there's also some recent work on Medline Plus. And also, if you are looking for free treatment, for example, if patients are not covered by Medicare or not covered by insurance, they may not be able to get treatment properly because he cannot afford treatment. So they need to go for free treatment, right? Like clinicaltrials.gov is also a government-mandated data set which allows the patient to be able to search for nearby clinical trials that it can go to and get free treatment, which is a really nice thing. But the problem is the readability of that is really terrible, that not normal people with less than 20 years of education can be able to understand the content. So it's really hard for them to get information they need. And also, from Yahoo Answers, you can ask questions to the whatever you like, and people in the community can be able to answer questions. This is a very good way to interact with your patients, with other patients in the community. And also, with the help of mobile health technology, people can maintain their health information on their own, in their own way, so that they can keep track of what is going on. All this is called participatory medicine, which is kind of like a paradigm shift, being allow the patients from being like a passenger to the active driver to be able to maintain their own health. And this is actually allowing the patients healthcare provider to encourage the patients to participate in their own health. So this is a very crucial thing nowadays. And also last year, President Obama announced the Precision Medicine Initiative. Basically, the idea is to get about 300 million people data voluntary data to kind of donate to this program, so that the researchers can do a lot of research in leveraging genetic information, behavior information, clinical information to be able to design personalized and individualized treatment plan. And also there's a mission statement that I want to point out here, is that the purpose of that is to enable a new era of medicine through research technology, policies that empowers patients, researchers, and providers to work together towards development of individualized care. And also this will pioneer a new model of research in which participants will be partners in the research process and actively engaged and informed. So, if we look at the whole background, actually there's a really nice motivation and background for allowing patients to interact with their providers and participate in the healthcare. But however, there is a huge terminology gap between consumers and healthcare providers, and this will hinder the effective communication between these two bodies. And for example, like this is our group of patients, and they usually describe their own health issues with their own language. For example, they may use heart attack to describe their symptom, right? But however, if you from the healthcare provider, from professionals' perspective, they may use some other language like myocardial infarction. I'm not sure how many of you actually have ever seen this, because I'm from China, which is not English-speaking country. I didn't know this before I joined my PhD program. So I know, okay, there's a lot of different terminologies between two bodies. So from the health professionals and informaticians' perspective, normally medical terminologies are very large and complex and very complicated. I would just want to use one example to illustrate it. Like there's one medical terminological system called the Unified Medical Language System, which is short for UMLS, which was created in 1986 by the National Life Medicine. And the purpose is to kind of translate the terminologies from one sort of vocabulary to another one, and be able to kind of using this dictionary as a dictionary for automated natural language processing, recognizing different symptoms and different synonyms of the same concepts and map them to the same one. And it currently contains over 3 million concepts and over 9 million terms. It's such a huge database. And it covers very professional terminologies like ICD, which is normally used for encoding the billing codes, encoding the diagnosis, and also like SNOMED-CT, which is a very comprehensive clinical terminologies containing over 300,000 concepts. And all these big terminologies are inside UMLS. It has a two-level structure, like metathesaurus and the semantic network. In a metathesaurus, like the terms from like SNOMED-CT, like myocardial infarction, cardiac function, and the concepts from NCI, which is National Cancer Institute thesaurus, like a heart attack, because they have the same meaning, they are mapping to the same concept in the UMLS called myocardial infarction with a unique concept identifier. And moreover, because I said this is a two-level structure, they not only want to describe their concepts in the lower level conceptual content, they also want to assign the concepts as to some semantic types to describe the semantic category of a concept. So there's like a whole new level of semantic network in which, for which every concept in the bottom level are assigned to one or more semantic type on the top level. This is how like informaticians or healthcare professionals are usually consider health medical terminology. But normally, this is not very easily understood by the consumers. So there is such a terminology gap. And as I mentioned before, if you want to look for clinical trials, you may go to clinicaltrials.gov to find there are some related trials you may enroll, right? But it's not readable. Like this figure shows a recent study comparing the readability between Medline Plus, the electronic health record, and the clinicaltrials.gov. And they found that in order to understand the trials from clinicaltrials.gov, you need to have at least roughly 20 years of education. It's very, very difficult, like, for normal people with no education background, how can they understand any language? And if you look at this text, they're actually pretty unreadable, right? I personally don't quite understand what they want to say. So imagine if you're a patient, you want to find information, this is really actually pretty difficult for you to understand. So there's a need for bridging the terminology gap between healthcare professionals and health information consumers. And some previous researchers found that the lay terms often lead to poorer searching result when it comes to searching information. And also they found that if they reformulated the search query, for example, if you fire a search query on Google, you reformulated from lay terms to professional terms, the search results got better because it's more relevant and more professionals use professional terms to describe such information. And of course, professional jargons are very understandable by the lay people. For example, normal people may use the term like floating kidney, but professionals may use the term nephroptosis. It's even pretty difficult for me to pronounce it. So all these are kind of like a driving force for us to analyze how can we bridge the gap, how can we make their translation easier. There's existing efforts on building these efforts on narrowing these disparities. Consumer health vocabulary is a terminology, control vocabulary created in 2006 by Harvard Medical School by Professor Dr. Qing Zeng. When they have this R1 grant, they are like, they have money to build this terminology. And this is a controlled vocabulary which consists of terms that are commonly used by healthcare users, to describe their common health expressions, concepts, explanatory models, attitudes, beliefs. And the major purpose of building CHV is that because it's integrated into this large terminology system called UMLS, the terms in CHV are linking to professional terms in UMLS. So they can use this as a bridging to kind of like translate lay term into professional terms. And however, because this is R1 grant supporting project, after the grant ran out, they didn't have money to maintain it. So after roughly 2002, 2001, basically there's no, very obvious efforts in maintaining this terminology, and it becomes open access and collaborative, which means that it actually attracts like the researchers or the community to identify potentially useful and potentially frequently used consumer terms to be able to enrich this vocabulary. And our recent finding is that in the most recent version of the UMLS, which is 2015 AB, the version for CHV is 2011, so it's like 4 years behind. And also it's relatively small. If we consider the number of concepts, the CHV currently contains about 56,000 concepts. If you compare it with terminology like SNOMED CT, which contains over 300 concepts, it's actually roughly 1 to 6 ratio in terms of size. So it's really, really small. So we really want to kind of identify new terms for enriching this terminology. And there's some existing work to enrich CHV. Especially in the recent years, I found there's quite a few techniques. For example, researchers try to use the crowd. They're like putting this medical text that are generated by lay people on Mechanic Turk of Amazon, and allows the Mechanic Turk workers to identify concepts from it, and which shows kind of pretty good results. But it's not very scalable, and it's a little bit costly though. Even if it's cheap, you still have to pay them. And also, researchers try to identify consumer expressions that co-occur with pre-selected adverse drug reactions terms from MedHelp. And also recently, in 2014, in an AMIA paper, Dr. Kai Zheng from University of Michigan, they did this study that they try to extract the medical terms along with their alternative lay terms from Wikipedia. And what they do is that what they do is that they identify pre-existing patterns, like they say, okay, also called, also known are some pattern we are focusing on. If we leverage this pattern, we can identify some important pair of concepts in Wikipedia. One is a professional term, another one is a lay term, right? For example, heart therapy, also called thermotherapy. This is like a pair of concepts which mean the same thing. So they use that to identify concepts. But the drawback, the limitation of this kind of method is that because you rely on pattern, so you have to have a predefined patterns to be able to extract some concept like this. So in our recent work, what we try to do is that we want to leverage the data from social media, like social question answers and blogs, to be able to identify concepts that are similar to existing CHV concept. But before we can do that, we actually have to understand the terminology coverage of these data sources in order to have a perception of what kind of information, what kind of concepts can we mine from these data sources. So initially, last year, I worked with Ming Su, and she collected some data from Tumblr blogs, and we used that data to kind of see how many, what's the coverage of medical terminology in UMLS on this tags. So this is the first study. I want to report it here. The first study's scope is to understand the coverage of controlled vocabularies in the UMLS in the blogger-specified tags. So here we want to limit only the tags which doesn't have anything to do with the real blogger content, because the tags are actually very short and concise, and dealing with tags, you don't have to deal with a lot of issues when you deal with natural language like chunking, sentence splitting, stuff like that. It's very simple. We just have to identify, okay, if the tag is matching UMLS concepts or not. So this is how a blog is like in Tumblr. In a Tumblr blog, every blog has a like a blogger name, has a content of a blog, as well as a user-specified tags. So here, the way that we identify the related blogs is that we just have to look at the tags, and as long as the tag contains a term called diabetes, we just consider this blog is something diabetes related. So we retrieve all the tags, all the blogs that are diabetes related, and identify the concept coverage. And our research question is that we want to ask how many tags are covered by the UMLS, and if we are covered by UMLS, how about the different source vocabularies? Because UMLS contains over 190 source vocabularies. We want to see which vocabulary has a pretty good coverage, which vocabulary has a low coverage. So we just have to focus on the very highly covered terminology for the further analysis. And for those tags that are not covered by UMLS, we also want to know if they are meaningful or not. So we leverage we leverage our human power, and the researchers, they manually look at these unmapped terms to see which ones are health related that can be used for enriching CHV. So our data set, as described, is from Tumblr, which is one of the fastest growing blogging website in the world. It contains over 227 million blogs as of February 2016, and we contain the Tumblr blogs between February 2015 to July 2015. So it's a relatively small period, and we don't have a lot of data. So that's one limitation of this work. As I said, we identify blogs if the tags of a blog contains a substring of diabetes. So like diabetes, diabetes mellitus, and type 2 diabetes are all considered in this method. And in total, we found 709 blogs that associated with diabetes in this period. And along with 700 blogs, there are 6,000 tags associated with it. So this is our analytical pipeline. We fetch the blogs from Tumblr, and we extracted tags from these blogs. We pre-process the tags and UMLS terms because some tag may not be exactly matching a UMLS term. They may have some linguistic variations. We want to take that into consideration so that we don't miss any potentially matching UMLS term. And then we match the process tag with the UMLS term, and then we assess, okay, if this term is covered by UMLS. And if it's covered, which terminology is covered, and how about its frequency? If it's not covered, we want to manually review it. So this is the way that we do this fuzzy matching. So, for example, we have two tags. We have two strings, one from tags in a blog, another one is a term in UMLS. What we do first is that we tokenize this tag, so breaking down to words, right? And then we do normalization, removing the capitalization, and also removing some punctuation mark. And then we reorder it by the numeric lexical order, so that, for example, in this term, one is becoming the first, and then followed by diabetes and type. So this one can be reordered this way as well, because we sometimes, like for example, in this way, type 1 diabetes, diabetes 1, their orders are different, so we need to reorder it, in a uniform way, to match it. And then finally, we do the stemming, removing some plural form and stuff like that. And then finally, if these two terms have exact match, we just say, okay, it's matched, which means that this tag can be matched to an existing UMLS term. Okay. And we assess the coverage. We found that among these 6,000 tags, we found 1,000 unique tags that are identified. And out of these 1,000 tags, 500, about 55% of them can be covered by at least one source vocabulary in the UMLS. And about 470 terms cannot be covered by any UMLS source vocabulary. And some of these tags are actually pretty meaningful, like type 1 diabetic, diabetes support, or cardio. Like you can tell that normally, normally they are pretty frequent actually, if you look at our future slides, which means that usually the users try and they like to use these kind of terms. And this is our coverage of vocabularies. We break down by source vocabularies. We found that consumer health vocabulary actually has a pretty good coverage in the tags. About 80% of tags that can be covered by UMLS are covered by CHV, and which followed by SNORM-ICT, RX norm, ICD. Just to give you information, RX norm is a terminology for medication, for drugs, and ICD is a terminology for clinical diagnosis. And so here we found that Snowman City and CHV has a pretty good coverage. So we'll do some further analysis in the future. And out of these tags that are covered by UMLS, about 60 tags are covered by only one source of vocabulary. And very few tags are actually covered by only CHV, because UMLS is really huge, it has many terminologies, so it's very likely that some tags are covered by this one or that one. So like glucose level, blood glucose level, lose weight, natural remedy, these kind of concepts are covered by only consumer health vocabulary. And this is a frequented tag that we found that covered by the UMLS. Like this is a breakdown by covered by UMLS, covered by CHV, covered by Snowman CT, and like some normal terms like diabetes is the mostly frequently occurred terms, followed by some other terms like depression, exercise, and some terms like alternative medicine and beauty are only covered by consumer health vocabulary, which is pretty understandable. And for those tags that are not covered by the UMLS, we found that they have some linguistic variations, and they may have some typos. And just to give you more information, consumer health vocabulary is actually a vocabulary that can contain some typos, because typos are often used by normal users. They want to make sure that they capture the typos so that they can do the translation as well. So for example, this is example for linguistic variation like type 1 diabetic, and the typos like Alzheimer or arthritis, oftentimes they wrote Alzheimer this way, but actually it should be written this way. I'm not sure if you will be writing Alzheimer will be making the same mistake. And arthritis is also a very easily mistaken word. And for these unmapped terms, Ming-Su and I, we analyzed 36 tags that occur more than twice in the data set. And we excluded some tags that are not English tags and not noun phrases, because we want to focus on nouns. And we found that 17 tags are meaningful. Something like cardio occurs 500 times across the data set, which is a really meaningful tags. And fitness equipment occur over 500 times. But these terms are not covered by the UMLS. So it means that maybe we can potentially add it to consumer health vocabulary, right? So in general, we found that the UMLS covers slightly more than half of the tags in the diabetes-related block in the study. And the overall coverage of consumer health vocabulary is pretty good in this small preliminary study. And later, because in this study 1, we only look at the tags. So in study 2, we want to expand our search into whole blocking content as well as social question answers, because we are very interested in terms of terminology coverage, what is the block content like. And our research question for this part is that we want to assess to what degree do the concept from the UMLS source vocabularies cover the concept used by the consumer describing their diabetes-related concerns on health postings of blogs and social question answers. And then we want to see which semantic type are applicable to analyze the concepts used by consumers describing their diabetes-related concepts, concerns in blogs and social question answers. The reason that we actually want to look at the semantic type because we want to use this information for our next study. So you'll see what we're using. So the unit of analysis, just to give two basic ideas of what we analyze here. The concept is a unit of understanding which is a fundamental component of a terminology and a unit in the meaning of an ontology. So in the context of a UMLS, the concept is like a kind of like a unique meaning which may contain multiple terms. So if the term have the same meaning, but they may have some linguistic variations, may come from different source vocabularies, they're covered, they're mapped to the same concept in UMLS. And also semantic type is a broader broader meaning of a concept, and every concept in UMLS is assigned to one or more than one semantic types in the UMLS. So here, because we want to compare kind of like the terminology coverage between blogs and the social question answers, so I got the data from Sanghi that are associated, including the diabetes-related social question answers. In total, we have included 3,700 blogs in Tumblr that are related with diabetes, and we also got 50,000 questions associated with associated answers from Yahoo Answers. And this is I think you already know, like Yahoo Answers is the most frequently used social Q&A with approximately 5.6 million visitors per month as of February 2016. It's one of the most used social question answer platform. And because one question may be associated with multiple answers, in this study for one question we'll only include the best answer that is selected by the user. So only one a pair, one question, one answer are included. So this is our conceptual framework. Because this is a document which is a full text, so we need to do a lot of processing before we can do this concept matching. So we perform the sentence splitting, tokenization, lexical variant generation, part of speech tagging, and word sense disambiguation. Particularly, I want to talk about a little bit more about the word sense disambiguation in the UMLS because there's a lot of terms with the same string but with different semantic meanings in the UMLS. So if we do the concept matching, a term may be matched to multiple concepts in UMLS with different semantic types. So our purpose of performing the word sense disambiguation is basically try to identify the most probable semantic of a concept, so that one term in a block or social question answer can be only mapped to one concept in UMLS, other than multiple. And after we do this WSD, word sense disambiguation, we look at all these concepts, all these n-grams, and we found for each one we try to map it to term in source vocabulary to see which, how about to analyze the source vocabulary coverage for the UMLS. So this is what we use for the natural language processing part. We use the open source platform called Apache Syntactic, which is a clinical text mining pipeline that are very widely used in medical informatics field. And also we used a white text extension, which developed by Yale University in 2011, which particularly focused on word sense disambiguation. So we use this platform, we use these tools for our NLP tasks. And this is our basic statistics about this three data set. For Tumblr, we found that out of 3,000 Tumblr blogging posts, only 30% of them contain at least one UMLS concept, which kind of make me very suspicious about using Tumblr, because we found that about 60% of Tumblr blog doesn't have any UMLS concept. Imagine UMLS concept is 3 million concepts. Yeah.
Do you mean was there any inclusion criteria?
As long as a blog has a tag with diabetes in it, we consider it as a diabetes-related blog. And we found that over 60% of blogs, the content doesn't include any UMLS concept. Like UMLS has 3 million concept, right? It's very likely that the blog doesn't have anything to do with medicine.
But those blog posts have that tag, and only 37% of them.
No, we use tags to find related blogs, but now in this work, we're not looking at the tags anymore. We're looking at the blogging post, the content of the post. And we found that Yahoo Answer question has a much better relevance. Like Yahoo Questions has about 88% of questions include some UMLS concept, and about 88.2% of answers include at least one UMLS concept. And on sentence level, the results are also similar. Only 27% of sentences in blogs contain UMLS concept, and about more than half, 57% and 62% of question answers can contain at least one UMLS concept. So it makes me very suspicious of using blogs for my next study. So the next study, I just didn't use social blogs anymore. And this is a coverage of UMLS source vocabularies on the poll, blog posting, and the social question answers data set. We found that SNOMED City has the best coverage. For the concept that are covered by UMLS, most of them are covered by SNOMED, and followed by CHV, MTH, NCI, MSSH, and SCSV. So CHV, even if CHV is about only 1/6 size of SNOMED City, it still has a pretty good coverage, which is actually pretty nice to look at, pretty nice to see, right? So now we only focus on SNOMED and the CHV to see what kind of terms are covered by these two terminology. So this is our frequent concept covered by both CHV and SNOMED. We found that all these concepts are somewhat related with diabetes, very frequently used, like blood, sugar, insulin, pharmacologic preparations, sugar, disease, and those are very general and frequently used terms. And if we look at the terms that are covered by only CHV but not SNOMED CT, and it's even more interesting, most of these terms are actually somewhat like drugs or insulin, different types of insulin that are being injected by the users to the users, and they're not really covered by SNOMED CT, which is pretty interesting. And if we look at another side, that frequent concept are covered by SNOMED CT but not consumer health vocabulary, it's also very interesting that most of these concepts are actually related with body organ components, right? Like entire skin, entire pancreas, entire heart, entire oral cavity, and those are covered by SNOMED and non-CHV, which is kind of understandable because normally those are pretty professional concepts, pretty professional terms that may not be widely used by the users, by the consumers. So, but if we look at the semantic types, actually across 3 different data sets, all of them exhibit a similar frequent semantic types. Mostly used frequent types including semantic types including finding, pharmacologic substance, therapeutic, preventive procedure, disease syndrome, organic chemical, etc. So those are frequently used across 3 data sets. So this is the ranking in blocks, this is the ranking in questions, this is the ranking in answers. So we just want to use this because I want to understand the frequency of semantic types. So the next step, we can kind of like leverage this information for our research. So in this study, we found that both SNOMED-CT and CHV has a pretty good coverage in blocks and social question answers. And the frequent semantic types in blocks and social question answers are very similar. So this is our way to understand the terminology coverage. In the next study, I want to kind of take a step forward to be able to automatically identify terms that are semantically, conceptually, contextually, and syntactically similar to existing CHV concept in social question answers. So the goal of this particular study is that we want to find, because existing methods of leveraging CHV typically employ the predefined patterns, lexical patterns, and a very intensive human review. In this study, we want to build a clustering-based computational model to identify terms in social question answers that are similar to existing CHV terms, so that we can kind of like scale up these methods to make it more scalable. So this is our conceptual framework. Basically, we use natural language processing to extract n-grams. N-grams is the definition of n-gram is a sequence of n terms in a given sentence. So n-grams means that n means number of words, right? So from Yahoo Answer data, we extract n-grams first, and we filter out those n-grams that occur less than 5 times. So these terms that are extracted are used more than 5 times in a data set. And then we identify whether these terms in n-grams extracted can be covered by consumer health vocabulary. If it can be covered, we consider it as a C term. If it cannot be covered, we don't care if it's covered by other sorts of vocabulary of UMLS, we consider them as candidate terms. And also, some terms may not be covered by the UMLS at all. So the purpose is that we want to identify the concept in this part from the candidate term set that are semantically conceptually similar to the C term. So our way to do that is that we first cluster the C term into clusters, and then we use Euclidean distance to compute the distance between a candidate term to its nearest centroid of the cluster. And we rank these candidate terms based on the score, and then we identify which ones are more relevant. I will talk about it in more detail. So this is our analytical pipeline. Because this is a very huge data set containing more than 50,000 concepts, and every step is very computational intensive. So we leverage the parallel processing technique, cluster technique called Apache Spark platform to parallel processing this various steps to make it more faster. So our input is Yahoo Answer, the UMLS dictionary, and some stop word list, because we want to filter out some stop words or phrases that contain some stop words, right? And then we do this feature generation using feature extraction and refine, and vectorize the features to make sure that one n-grams is represented by a set of vectors, a set of features in a vector. And we do the candidate ranking because we want to assess the performance. So we compare our ranking methods using clustering-based methods with term frequency-based, with C-value-based, with random-based to see if our methods perform better. And then finally, we gave this list that are ranked to the human reviewer to review whether they are related with consumer health or not. So this is the basic statistics about our n-grams extracted. Out of these 50,000 question-answer pairs, we found that extracted over 27,000 n-grams that occurred more than 5 times in the data set. And we stratified our statistics by the number of words in the n-grams. So the length, which are shorter, contains relatively more number of n-grams. If we go further, we found that this bar is a bar for CHV, right? This bar is for UMLS, except for CHV. And this one is for the other, which are not covered by UMLS at all. We found that for n-grams and bigram, 2 grams and 3 grams, CHV actually cover a pretty good amount of n-grams. But for 4 gram, 5 gram, we found that a lot of n-grams are not covered by CHV nor UMLS. So it kind of showed the potential of identifying some potentially meaningful and useful n-grams for which are longer than 3 words, right? So this is what we use in order to construct the vector for each n-gram, because we want to leverage the machine, the data mining methods. For data mining methods, you have to construct the feature vector for your instance, and then you use that feature vector to kind of throw it into the clustering methods. So we predefined 313 features. This is some of the features we used. We categorized them into basic feature, the linguistic feature, and a contextual feature. In basic feature, basically it's a feature about the term itself, like term frequency. The document frequency is the number of times that the number of documents that these n-grams occurred, right? And the C value is a very popular way to filter out non-meaningful n-grams in natural processing, which takes into account the length of a word as well as word embedding. And for the linguistic feature, because we want to understand the linguistic in terms of whether it's noun, it's verb, or etc. like that, something like that. So we leverage the syntactic pattern. We use a POS tagging, part of speech tagging, to tag the n-grams to understand its position in a sentence, whether it's verb or it's noun, and we identify the patterns in terms of the combinations of different POS tags. And then also use a capitalization feature. For example, if one term, the first letter of one term is capitalized, it's one pattern. If the terms in all the words in a term, the first letter of the words in the term are all capitalized, is another pattern. If all the letters in all the words are capitalized, is another pattern. So we kind of leverage that as well. And also we look at the prefixes, suffixes that are given by one of the lists in the National Life Medicine. We identify the existence of such prefixes and suffixes in the n-grams. And also for the contextual feature, because for given sentences, we not only want to kind of capture the information about the n-gram itself, we also want to capture the information surrounding it. So for the POS context, it means that for one n-grams, we look at the window size of 10 in a given sentences, like how many nouns are appearing around it, how many verbs are appearing around this n-gram, and how many adjectives, and etc., etc. So this information are captured by this feature called POS of the context. And for C term of context, it means that in a given sentences, we identify a list of CHV terms, which are C terms, and we identify in the given sentences how many consumer health vocabulary terms are co-occur with the given n-grams, and how close is one n-gram to this nearest CHV term. And also for the semantic of context, it means that the semantic types, the number of semantic types that occur that are of the words of the term that are around given n-grams. So this is a example showing you how do we do this. So for example, in a sentence like, I lost a ton of weight, I was always 130 or above, I eat fine, but I can have really big meals. So here our n-grams is big meals. So for these sentences, we identify all the n-grams, all the terms that are covered by CHV, like lost weight, above, eat, fine, but. These are all terms that are covered by consumer health vocabulary. And then we look at its syntax, like whether it's noun, it's verb, and then for given term like big meal, we look at how many verbs are there, how many nouns are there, how many adjectives are there, how many other different POS tags are there. This is the POS tag context, and this is a C term context, which means that for a term like big meal, how many CHV terms co-occur with this one. So for example, in this sentence, 6 CHV terms are co-occur with this one. So it's we call it thickness to C term is 6, and the distance to its nearest C term between the big meal to its nearest one, which is this one, is 4, because there are 4 words between these two CHV terms, between these two terms. So we also leverage this information, and this information is about the semantics, because in the beginning, in the previous work, we assessed there are like 12 semantic types that occur pretty frequently. So we want to assess what's the most frequently occurred semantic types in a sentence. So this is, we kind of listed like this. This is the identifier for semantic type, and then we assess how many words of a semantic type occur in a given sentence or in a collective sentences of a certain n-gram. So this is how we construct the contextual features. So for the other features, I just want to, for the interest of time, I just want to skip them. So if you're interested, you can talk to me. Because as I said, there are 300 features that we constructed for a given n-gram. So there's no way that we can visualize and understand the characteristics of the data. So in order to see what is the data really look like in terms of its feature space, we use the principled component analysis, which is a very kind of like popular methods to reduce the dimensions of a feature space into a lower dimension. So this is how we reduce the dimension. We found that if we reduce to 3 dimension, the data set exhibit a pretty good clustering characteristics. So they can kind of like clustering in a similar way, which means that some concepts, they're close to each other in terms of a context and the syntax and stuff like that. And this is just a matrix plot of this 3D plot. So you can also see clusters. So this is why we leverage the clustering methods to do this work. All we do is that we take all the C terms that are covered by CHV out as our training sample, and we cluster these C terms using k-means clustering. And then for each candidate term that are not covered by CHV, right, we look at, we use Euclidean distance to analyze the distance between the term with its nearest center of a cluster. And we use this one as a similarity score for a term. So if the score is smaller, it means that this term is closer to a cluster, which means that it's similar to existing CHV term in terms of context and semantics and syntactics. And then we rank the terms by its similarity score, and we give this suggestion to users. So in order to evaluate methods, we first take the C term into 30%. We take 70% of the C term as a training sample, another 30% of the C term as a testing sample. And our evaluation is that, if we use this 70% of the training sample to train our model to do the clustering, we want to assess if we assess the similarity between this validation term to the training term. We want to see whether this validation term can rank high in our data set, because they're all CHV terms. We already know they're CHV terms. They should be somewhat similar, right? So our ranking should be able, our method should be able to rank this CHV term in the validation data set, based on our methods. So we assess this, and we use recall precision F-score. And basically, recall means that out of all the C terms in our validation data set, how many C terms can be ranked top in the top P%? And precision is that out of all these terms that rank in the top P%, how many of them are C terms? And also F-score is a harmonious mean of this recall and precision. And this,
quick question.
yes.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you because I have to leave it.
Sure, sure.
So if you go back quickly, so we use basically you need machine learning to identify, to determine entities, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then have you evaluated the performance of that algorithm in terms of entity determination, or did
you mean the determining?
N-grams, right?
Yeah. We use n-grams, and we use previous methods to identify matching UMLS terms or matching CHV terms out of all these n-grams. We didn't in that step we didn't use any machine learning algorithm. We just purely used term matching.
Yeah,
so,
but I'm talking about the pipeline you described. So the reason you use n-grams to identify entities in your social Q&A data,
right? Mm-hmm.
And then you use those entities or instances of those entities to compare the degree of coverage, right? To calculate the degree of coverage with the existing control vocabularies. So what I'm asking, have you assessed the accuracy of the algorithm before you've done the comparison part?
You mean the entity recognition?
Entity identification, entity determination part.
I see. We didn't evaluate that part because we rely on our tools like CText and YTech to perform that for us. We didn't really evaluate how well they can recognize the terms in the n-grams. I think that I'm sure I can be confident that the term recognition should be pretty accurate, but the semantic disambiguation, the word sense disambiguation may not be that accurate, because this is a very challenging task in NLP, in natural language processing, to recognize the correct, accurate meaning of a concept. Because, like I said, a concept may have different meanings, right? A term may have different meanings, so it's a very challenging task. We're still trying to, right now we're trying to assess the accuracy of word sense disambiguation using another data set, because I'm actually using that for another project. But actually, it's a good point that we should be very careful about that particular part, because that kind of like, if that part is not accurate enough, when it propagates to our next step, maybe our next step may not be that well performed as well. Okay. So this is our evaluation methods. We compare our method with 3 baselines: the term frequency baseline, the random order baseline, and the C-value baseline. And as I said, because we want to give a lot of information to the users, to the readers, so in this figure, we have a lot of variables. Like this axis is the top n%. For example, if we have 1,000 terms in 1,000 CHV terms in our validation data set, the top n means that the top n% out of the CHV terms. For example, if n is 10, it means that we want to assess the first top 100 terms that are ranked by our algorithm. How many CHV terms are there? And out of this 100, how many CHV terms can be retrieved? And this is our evaluation. And also, because we use k-mean clustering, for k-mean clustering, it's very difficult to determine the number of clusters. So we also assess the number of clusters. We kind of look at all the possible cluster numbers from 5 to 300 with an increment of 5. So this black like curves are different number of clusters that are used. And you can see that across like this data set, across our methods, across like different top n%, our methods outperforms all 3 baselines. It's only when like the number of clusters are relatively small, our methods is a little lower than term frequency. But when our k is big, it's actually pretty good. And also, when k get bigger and bigger, actually the difference is smaller. They actually converge. So you can see a lot of like darker colored curves actually are close to each other. And this is a figure for precision. And also similarly, it outperforms all 3 baselines. And this is F measure. So it also shows that it performs well. So because we cannot purely rely on like automated quantitative methods to evaluate method, we want to assess how many terms are really meaningful to the users. So we also perform the manual review. What we did is that using our method, we rank our term. We used all the CHV term as a training sample, as the training data to train the k-mean clustering model, and then we use all the terms that cannot be covered by CHV, no matter if it can be covered by UMLS or not, as a candidate set. We compute the similarities and we kind of rank them. And because we are very interested in looking at how the length of a term can determine the relevance of the consumer can affect the result. So for each term of 1 word, 2 word, 3 word, 4 word, 5 words, we look at the top 100 ranked n-grams, and then in total we look at the top 500 n-grams. We use the CHV term guideline proposed by used by Dr. Qing Zeng, which is a developer of CHV, to assess this relevance. And some criteria are like CHV terms should be syntactically constituents or phrases such as noun phrases, and CHV terms should have independent semantics, and n-grams representing existing UMLS semantic concepts should be considered as CHV terms, but UMLS terms may represent non-UMLS terms, which means that for those candidate terms that cannot be covered by UMLS, they could potentially be a CHV term as well. And our raters are given 3 options. The first option is that this term should not be included in CHV. The second option is that this term may possibly be included. The third option is that this term should be included. And also for each concept, for each n-gram, we also give some other information like term frequency, document frequency, and the example sentences where this n-grams occurred. We give all this information to our evaluator to assess its relevance. And because some raters may rate 1, 2, or 3, right? So there's some conflict resolution happening. So we need to resolve the resolution, and we only look at all these terms that are ranked by one evaluator and 3 by another evaluator, because that means that there are significant disagreement. We need to resolve that. So this is our manual review process. Before our resolution, our Cohort's kappa is really low, like 0.33, which makes sense because 2 is kind of like in the middle, right? You know, sometimes it's really difficult to judge whether a term should be null or should not. So someone may say 1, someone may say 3, someone may say 2. So the resolution is not good. And after we look at all these terms that rank by that rated by 1 or 3 by 2 raters, we talk about it together with me, with my 2 raters to determine what's the final score for that. And after we resolve the conflicts, our kappa becomes much higher. It's near substantial agreement, 0.58. And this is the final results because we want to categorize 2, right? If one person say this term should be included, another person say this term may possibly include it, we consider this term to be should be included. In another way, if a term is rated 2 and 3, like one say it could be included, another one say it should be included, we just map it to 3. So after that, we found that out of all these 500 terms, and about 34 terms should be included in CHV, and about 65 terms are not relevant. And remember, even if this result doesn't show very high percentage of inclusion of percentage of useful CHV, because we're not using any patterns, we're not using any rules, we're purely relying on n-grams, which are very free. So this one actually, I think, to me, is a pretty good result. So this is our number of suggested terms stratified by length. We found that n gram, 1 gram, 2 gram, 3 grams, they have an increasing number of suggested terms. And when it gets longer, very few terms actually should be considered. Only for 5 grams, only 10 out of 100 are suggested to be included in CHV. And so this is some examples like labs, calorie intake, carb intake are frequently used by users, but they're not included in CHV. But they're including, this one is including UMLS. And this is some example sentences. And again, I just want to mention that because I have some, my research background in PhD is medical terminology quality assurance. We want to ensure that a good quality, a good control vocabulary should require a domain completeness and consistency in quality. And so these unidentified tags must be further processed before incorporating into a controlled vocabulary like CHV. And the inclusion decision of whether this should be included should be made by the curators of the controlled vocabulary. So last, I want to mention that we have some limitations because we just purely look at whether terms are related. We didn't even look at whether these terms directly can be mapped to existing UMLS concepts. This is one limitation. Another limitation is our qualitative evaluation were only performed by 2 researchers. So by 3 researchers plus me at the resolution part. So we may not be very comprehensive in terms of determining the relatedness of the term. And so as a summary, we show that our similarity-based methods outperforms random order, C-term, and frequency-based baselines. And we found that social media is a very fertile ground for extracting consumer terms for CHV. So this is my acknowledgement. I really appreciate to receive grants from Amazon Web Services, educational grant to kind of help me with this work. And also I got the support from my colleagues, FSU, Dr. Warren Allen, shared his computer resources, which actually help a lot in this work, and also students like Min-Soo Park and Zhi Wei, they really helped me a lot in this work. And also the collaborators like Dr. Sang-Hee Oh, she shared her social question answer data for 10 years, which is, I really appreciate that. And also my collaborators from University of Florida, from College of, from School of Communication, Dr. Jinhui Ho. And also in the iConference, I got a chance to meet the creator of CHV, Dr. Catherine Arnott Smith, to talk about this project. Actually, she's pretty excited about it, and I think I will need to continue this kind of like a discussion with her in all this future work. So that's all for the presentation. Thank you. Any questions?
What other social media data sources would you consider?
I would consider, I would say I would consider like the more health-related, more clean, it's better. Because I really don't want to spend too much effort cleaning the data. So that's why, for the third study, I did not really want to spend too much effort in cleaning the blogs data. I know there are a lot of there might be a lot of information that are useful, but it takes too much effort to find the really related information from blog. So I just purely use social question answers, because in social question answers there is a category called diabetes, which means that all the question answers must be diabetes related, right? And they are health related, so I don't even need to do a lot of filtering on that.
Right, you could Reddit.
Reddit?
So because they're topic specific sections.
Right. Right. But the thing is that we want to really first build a very robust methods before we can test it on different platform. Like this method, even if I think to me it's very interesting. Actually, we are not the person who invented this similarity-based methods. In the last year, AMIA, we tried these methods on clinical trial eligibility criteria to identify potentially useful terms for enriching SNOMED, which is a clinical terminology, and found that work shows pretty good promising results. And I think one of the reasons is that the clinical trial eligibility criteria are very short, concise, and they're very, medical related. So that may make it easier. But for this one, because it's a user generated text, so we do have seen some difficulties in really generating meaningful information. Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to comment because the social, the blogs and social Q&A, whenever I talk with the people with the internet kind of resources, people go to the internet and do lots of things. And then when they talk about social Q&A, okay, this is a place where there's all jokes and the information, they probably just want to post it out, and then what can we find a good health information out there? But actually, the study has about 80% of the terms that the people are using are actually from the UMLS. So people has been very serious somehow, providing and then sharing that information in the context. So hopefully, the social Q&A or other type of social media, that these could be the very fruitful and meaningful places for actually getting understanding what people are talking. I went to the Health Collegian, was this week, right? A couple of days ago. And then there are many people from the medical schools that they talk about consumer behaviors, and one of the very old kind of professors, he's been very good in medical, of course, he's been doing pristine research in their area, but he just told me that, the internet is just so full of the kind of the information that is not true. That what's wrong with the people, and what do we have to do? And he was very serious how we can deal with this information from the social media or others. So hopefully we can start digging on what the people's understanding. They probably use the UMLS terms. Maybe they know some of having medical knowledge, but they may not know how to deal with it. So hopefully we can leverage out what people's kind of reflections from that perspective to the research that we're dealing with the terms. So hopefully it works.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, one thing that I'm kind of curious about, because I study smartwatches, so when we start talking about participatory medicine, the thing I kept thinking about is, so how much of the data that are being collected by these devices, Fitbit, Apple Watch, whatever, is actually even related to terminology here, because then that might make things better, it might make things worse. And I don't know, because I haven't even thought about it until just as you were talking. Is there even is it even compatible? Is the language something that's useful? Because you might talk about calories, caloric, energy expenditure, zones, different cardio zones. I'm kind of wondering, what you might think on that.
I think because one of the purpose of this research about consumer health vocabulary in general is to translate lay terms to professional terms, right? So what I'm more interested in to see is that how can we give information to consumers in a more understandable way, not really giving a lot of jargon to them, asking them to look up the dictionary to look at their meanings, but rather give them more lay kind of explanation of a certain thing. I think this certainly related when it comes to communicating or interface, building an interface between a consumer with a professional, right? Because we want to make sure that both parties are happy about what they see. So I think this is somewhat related. But to me, I think I can refer you to some resources. There's a really popular Journal of Biomedical Informatics review articles on mobile phones on how people really use that in their medical decision process. I think that I can definitely share that article with you. I think you might find it interesting. Yes.
Well, I'm sorry I'm late to things that I just taught,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering, I'm also doing the social media and
Right.
communicating and stuff. I know how dirty it is and it's hard to find the understanding and stuff, but how do you think this research can be useful or beneficial for those who have actual professional knowledge and stuff, like practitioners or the researchers or stuff? Like how?
I think we need to identify a way to really identify meaningful information in this dirty web data sites, right? And I think using terminology is a way that we can use to filter out those irrelevant information. I think that might be something interesting to professionals, because professionals definitely they are willing to see what are being discussed by the user, by the consumers, right? They can take that into account when it comes to decision making. Yeah, I think that's actually something useful. And because in the whole of this research I presented are basically terminology, like concept level, term level. In the next few years, I think I will definitely work a lot on how do we make meaningful information, linked information, and make this information linked in a way that we can identify important patterns or important information. Yeah, there are a lot of things to do upon this data set, my perception. Yeah.
It's just coming from my own personal experience as well.
Yes.
But, when you go to doctor and meet those professional people and the lay people, they have some difficulty.
Right.
So what I really want to get the information is not their major interest.
Right.
We employ different types of communication, tones, and all this stuff.
Yeah, I have actually a research idea. I talked to Sang-Hee before. I'm thinking social question answer. There are so many related information spread it out across different question answers. I'm trying to see if there's a way to integrate them in a way that we can find meaningful patterns, so that if a professional they want to look at, okay, what has been discussed in social question answers for this kind of drug, right? We can just search for this term and all this related information can be connected somehow or can be mined to see, okay, what are really being discussed. They don't have to look at each document by document. They can just look at it as a kind of a pattern. So that might be useful for them to kind of understand the consumer's perspective. Yeah. All right.
After I'm interested in deaf and other disabled group, what I found in the literature is the languages and communication barriers of those minority groups are even more serious than the lay people, and it seems like the professionals, even there's cultural barriers, language barriers, and maybe other barriers we don't know, make the communication really hard to happen, and sometimes the professionals get very bored to explain things to the patients, the deaf patients, and patients get every survey results indicate that they are very unsatisfied with communication with the doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So if your research can have maybe the implication for those minority groups, I think it will become a huge contribution.
Yeah, of course. I can see a lot of potential funding opportunities there because funding agencies really care about minorities. If you can address their real issues, they're really happy about it. So I think it's definitely a good way to go. Yeah, it's definitely our long-term goal is, of course, trying to bridge the gap and trying to make them easier to communicate. All right. So feel free to talk to me afterwards. I will be available in my office. If you have any interest in getting to know more about the research and get to know how we can automate something, I can definitely share some of the resources. Actually, we're trying to make this platform open source so everyone can use that.
I hope in the future you can have some seminars about data mining of social media for doctor students.
Oh yeah, I hope I can. Yeah, definitely. I'll put into my calendar and say, okay, when can I develop such course? That's would be great.
Already the busiest man in Tallahassee.
No. Thank you.